Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And today is another step-by-step tutorial on how to make this surprise cake. There are lots of different ways on how to make the surprise cake, but this way is the most successful way, especially if you want to have different types of cake designs, and I find it's the one that's going to be the most successful. And trust me, I really didn't want to mess up this surprise, and I'll show you that full video at the very end. So first off, what you need to do is you need to get all of your pictures or your money, whatever you're wanting to hide inside of the cake, in order and cover it with a bunch of tape, or make sure that it is wrapped in some sort of cellophane. Because this part might potentially touch some of the frosting as it's coming out of the cake, you just want to make sure that it's not going to get damaged. You can choose to laminate this, but I will say if it's a really tough lamination, as in very good quality lamination, it might not work as well. You want it to be a little bit flimsy, so during the rolling process, you don't get all of these little creases. I'm using a cut bubble tea straw, but you can use whatever you have lying around as long as it's cylindrical and it has a hole in the middle that another straw or dowel can fit into. We're going to place this entire bubble tea straw contraption into a toilet paper roll. It doesn't necessarily need to be a toilet paper roll. It could be a paper towel roll. All it needs to do is it needs to be able to hold this entire thing in place. You could probably use some sort of small box. I just find that this is something most people have lying around. It's also really important that you leave something at the top that can actually be grabbed. So you'll notice that there's a little bit of tape and leeway room at the top here so that the photos can easily come out of the roll. And make sure that the cuts that you make in the roll are not too wide, but also not too small so that it can't actually come out. Since this is going to go into the cake, you obviously can't have cardboard touching the cake because that would just get soggy, and it's also gross against your cake. So to make it food safe, you do need to make sure that you cover it with some sort of parchment or wax paper. I used wax paper. This part can be a little bit tricky because you need to be able to tape this to something, but you don't want to tape it to the picture because then obviously when you pull up everything, the wax paper will just go with it. So make sure you find those pieces of cardboard to actually adhere the wax paper to. I wanted to ensure that this pregnancy announcement would not get messed up, so I made sure to check it several times before deciding, yep, it's good to go, and placing it in my cake. So let's get to actually making the cake. You could do this with a store-bought cake as well if making cakes is not your thing, but I'm making mine from scratch. My friend wanted a vintage heart cake with all of that trendy vintage piping, so that is what we're going to make her today. And yeah, ignore that little patch in the center. This baked in a pan that was one of those springform pans. I really don't use it often, as it tends not to be the best quality pan that bakes as evenly as my other pans because it's just an off-brand pan. However, I do like that it has the heart shape, and although I could carve a heart shape with just a round pan, because we were doing the surprise cake, I needed to make sure that it was one solid piece of cake. What I'm doing here is just digging out enough cake so that that roll is going to fit in there. And I do want that roll to get in there relatively deeply. I don't want it to be sticking out. So here I realize it's still sticking out a little bit, so I dug out some more. This is the really, really important part. Sticking a dowel right through the center, and you're trying to get that dowel through to the other side so that the bubble tea straw is around that dowel. This is what's going to ensure that everything stays in place. I decided to forego any fancy fillings for this cake just because I wanted it to be very uncomplicated, and really I was mostly concerned with the surprise working out. But now having made this, I think you can do filling for sure. What I would do is I would just outline the border of where that roll is actually going, and the filling would go all around. And you would make a dam just like you would with any other type of filling. You would just have to make an extra dam around where that roll section is. I want to make sure that this cake stays extra moist, so I'm putting on some simple syrup, which is just a combination of 1-to-1 water and sugar. Must be warm water, and just placing it on there once all the sugar is dissolved. And then I'm placing on some chocolate buttercream. And because I didn't want this to be too boring, adding on some score bits. I feel like I've been adding score bits to everything lately. Just gives it that really nice crunch. But did you know that score bits actually do contain nuts? I just learned this the other day. And I used to work at a bakery where we put score bits on everything, even for nut-free things. So it's just really weird to me that they have nuts in them. But apparently there are almonds in score bits. I put a little bit of extra cake on top of the roll. It just felt weird to put frosting directly on there. It probably would have been okay, but I decided to add some more cake on there just so it would be extra secure. Since we have that piece of cellophane sticking out, which of course is imperative to the surprise part of this cake, it makes crumb coating this very difficult. I've seen the surprise pull part done a few different ways. Some people like to attach a topper to the front of the cellophane just with a little bit of tape, and then people can pull on the topper. I don't want a topper on this cake. Instead, I'm going to actually hide that piece of cellophane later, and then the customer actually lifted it off and then just pulled the cellophane straight out. But that's purely just an aesthetic thing. Before putting this super pale purple buttercream on top of the outside of the cake, I put that in the fridge for about an hour just to make sure that none of that chocolate would transfer onto this purple buttercream. I'm using Italian meringue buttercream for this, but I also find faux Swiss buttercream or even real Swiss meringue buttercream works really well. You just want something that has good hold since you're going to be doing a lot of piping if you're going to make the vintage part of this cake. I definitely didn't cover this cake really perfectly with the purple buttercream. I knew I was going to be doing a lot of piping on this, so any imperfections would most likely get covered up. But if I knew that this cake was going to be bare, I would have spent even more time making sure that everything was perfectly covered. Whenever I'm decorating a cake like this, the first thing I like to do is add on the border. For some reason, it just helps it feel more finished, and then I can get a better visual on what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the cake. Of course, any good vintage piped cake has to have a swag border, and I know that this part kind of freaks people out a little bit. It can feel a little intimidating, especially with a number 2 tip like this. Key here is to really make sure that you put enough pressure on that piping bag, and don't be afraid to pull away from the cake. Sometimes when it comes to lines like this, people feel like they need to hold the line closer to gain more control when it's actually the exact opposite. And I am doing a double swag here. I don't end up doing a triple swag with the number 2 tip, but I do end up doing a triple swag with a completely different tip, and that might be a better option for those of you who are maybe a little bit nervous about these type of swags, because it's a lot thicker and it's a lot more forgiving and it doesn't take the same technique. So as you can see here, I'm using a completely different tip and I'm just wiggling things back and forth. And so whenever I'm making a vintage cake like this or doing vintage piping like this, I always put on a coupler with my bag, which is that little plastic piece where you can change out the tips really easily. You don't have to stick to one color like I am, but I do love the monotone of these vintage cakes that I've been seeing. However, I think 1 or 2 colors in kind of the same color palette look really good, but do whatever your heart desires. Now, you might be wondering, how do you get this to be even all the way around? I personally eyeball it, but if you are not the eyeballing type, that is okay. You can make little indents with a ruler all the way around your cake first, and it will all get covered up with whatever piping work that you are doing. My original plan was that I was going to write on the top of the cake, but there was no way I could make it work with that plastic sticking out, so I decided to just cover up the entire top of the cake. Now, had I known that I was going to just cover the entire top of the cake with this piping, I wouldn't have put that extra layer of purple buttercream down on the top. Because my plan was upended, I didn't really plan this part that well. I end up putting this heart thing on here. It doesn't really work out as planned because, of course, I need to cover up that plastic part. So I end up putting on a bunch of pearls everywhere, but I believe that heart does end up getting kind of moved and doesn't really get seen anymore. The pearls really brought this together for me, but I know some people are not super into the pearls because they can be quite hard. So definitely, if you're making this for a client, ask them if that's something that they are into. I probably could have stopped here with the piping, but I just had so much leftover buttercream I didn't want to waste, and I was just having so much fun. You know, when a cake is just working out and nothing is really going wrong, so it's just easy and you've got time on your hands? That was what was happening for me. And for some reason, my camera is really making this look very gray. It was not a gray cake at all. It was actually kind of warmish. A little bit of pink in there and a little bit of purple. So I let that rest in the fridge overnight, and then I went ahead and I made this fondant piece. And don't make the same mistake as me. If you're wanting to cover up that piece of cellophane with fondant, probably make this the day before, or at least make it a few hours before placing it on. You just want it hard enough so that it just sits on top. Mine sags a little bit, so I have to end up using some buttercream to just prop it up a little bit more. By the way, I love these fondant impressions. They are just so beautiful, and I love that they came out a few years ago, and there's just been more and more options. I have been dying to share with you guys this surprise cake tutorial for a very long time, but I patiently waited because, of course, my friend hadn't revealed her pregnancy to everybody. But I am so excited to be able to share this little clip with you. It is such a precious moment.
Oh. Oh my God. What is this?
Pictures.
Oh my God.
What?
Are you serious?
The relief I had when my friend sent me the video and said that everything went off without a hitch, I was super, super happy for her, and I was also excited that the cake was intact. A few of you have been asking, begging for me to bring back subscriber submissions. So if you guys make this surprise cake tutorial with whatever design, but you use the method that I showed you at the beginning of the video, then please tag me in a photo at SD Bake Shop on Instagram, and you could be featured in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!